Welcome to another episode of Somali Nexus. Imagine a timeline where the Horn of Africa didn't just participate in trade, it dominated it. We call this lost empire the Azure Titan, ancient Somali superpower. While history paints the coast as loose ports, we explore a centralized empire that rivals Rome, reimagining the ancient Macrobian kingdom as a unified world power. The divergence begins in 525 BCE when Persian aggression acts as a catalyst for unity. The famous unstrung bow becomes a symbol of political identity, leading the coast to consolidate under a high king. Instead of independent city-states, ports like Opone and Mosylon integrate into a powerful federal system led by royally appointed governors. This Oponian hegemony establishes a monopoly of the monsoon, forbidding Indian vessels from sailing past the coast. Opone transforms into a walled imperial capital, serving as the sole bottleneck for Asian luxuries entering the West. By controlling this flow, the empire captures immense shipping profits and drains bullion from the Roman economy on a massive scale. Maritime dominance is achieved through the Beden, a traditional sewn ship with flexible hulls that ride heavy swells. Unlike rigid Roman galleys, these vessels allow for true blue water operations, enabling the state to project power. This naval capacity creates an Azure wall, while the Incense wall on land protects precious frankincense groves from highland raiders. The geopolitical climax arrives with the alliance of the Crescent, formed with Sassanid Persia to halt Aksumite expansion. In the Battle of the Red Sea, the Oponian fleet utilizes incendiary weapons to devastate Aksumite transports. This decisive victory cements the hegemony as a third superpower, turning the Red Sea into a hostile lake for the Romans. Even the plague of Justinian fails to break them, as their dispersed pastoral layout acts as a buffer against infection. These counterfactual reveals that the fragmentation of the Somali coast was not inevitable. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lost empire of the Indian Ocean, but before we dive deeper into the story, please don't forget to hit subscribe on Somali Nexus to stay updated with every episode. Share your thoughts, feedback. Let's get started. If you're anything like us, you want that deep, insightful knowledge, but you want it fast. You want those aha moments without, having to read a dozen academic papers.
Exactly. You want the shortcut to being the most interesting person in the room.
And that is what we do here. We synthesize piles of sources, archaeology, ancient texts, geography, and we show you what could have been.
And today we're doing something really ambitious. We're not just looking at history. We are building an entire empire that almost was an empire that could have completely upended the ancient world.
That's right. This is a massive counterfactual deep dive. We are exploring the rise of a pan-Somali power that could have dominated the Indian Ocean. We're calling it the Macrobian Oponian thalassocracy.
Or our shorthand for it, the Azure Titan.
Aha, I like that. So in our timeline, the history of the Horn of Africa, at least in this period, is really the story of one major power, right? The kingdom of Aksum.
Overwhelmingly so, Aksum was the highland power. And when you read the classical sources like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, the Somali coast, which they called Barbaroi or Punt, it's just a string of decentralized independent market towns.
The Opone, Mosylon, Malau, important for trade, for sure.
Very important, but strategically fragmented. And because they were fragmented, they were vulnerable.
But the sources, they hint at something more, don't they? The potential for a unified power was always there, just sort of simmering under the surface.
It absolutely was. You have all this overlooked evidence. You've got these massive ancient cairn fields at Salwain. You have the incredible sewn boat technology of the Beden. And of course, the immense wealth from things like frankincense.
So, our mission in this alternate timeline, we're talking roughly 500 BCE to 600 CE, is to take that evidence and project what happens if they get it together.
If they centralize, what happens when a Macrobian Oponian hegemony emerges with a single command structure, exploiting all those advantages they already had?
And the knock-on effects are huge. This isn't just a regional story. A power like this fundamentally changes the entire balance between Rome, Sassanid Persian, and Aksum.
It doesn't just shuffle the deck, it flips the whole table of Afro-Eurasian history on its head.
And this entire massive shift, this whole new timeline, pivots on one single moment, a single act of defiance around 525 BCE.
That's the pivot.
Okay, let's unpack this because I find it a little hard to believe that a simple diplomatic snub could unify an entire sprawling and complex region. Was this just symbolic, or did the Persians actually pose a real enough threat to force them all to unite?
That's the perfect question. Because the unification isn't an accident. It's driven by a very real existential fear that's rooted in their depth history. To get the Macrobians, you have to go way back. We're talking about a historical pedigree stretching back thousands of years.
We're talking about the land of Punt, aren't we? The legendary trading partner of the Egyptian pharaohs.
Precisely. For the Egyptians, this area was a core part of Punt, which they called Ta Netjer, the land of the gods. And the key thing here is that Punt wasn't just some passive place they got stuff from.
No, they were active partners.
Sophisticated logistical partners. They were organizing these massive shipments of gold, ebony, and especially frankincense, which was absolutely vital for Egyptian religious life. They were, in a way, essential to the world's first superpower.
So they already had this deep institutional knowledge of how to manage large-scale trade routes long before the Greeks and Romans ever showed up. That explains the competence. But what about the identity of the Macrobians themselves?
So you fast forward to the 6th century BCE. Egypt is in decline, persistent Persia is on the rise, and the Greeks are the new chroniclers of the world. And Herodotus, he writes about a people he calls the Macrobians, literally the long-lived ones living along the South Sea, which is what he called the Indian Ocean coast.
And he gives us this incredible, almost mythic description of them. I'm still hung up on the gold fetters for prisoners.
That detail is so critical. It's not just about wealth. Herodotus says they had so much gold, they used it for mundane things, even for chaining up their prisoners.
What a statement.
It's the ultimate power move, isn't it? Using a precious metal as a tool of punishment. It signals absolute confidence in your native wealth and a complete refusal to be impressed by the northern powers who were desperate for that same gold.
Now, in our original timeline, this powerful microbial kingdom just sort of fades away after Persia conquers Egypt. It breaks down into those fragmented city-states that are so easy for Rome to manipulate later on. The threat is lost.
But in our alternate timeline, this is the pivot. The crisis that forces them to unify happens in 525 BCE. The Persian emperor Cambyses II has just conquered Egypt, and he decides to push south and, take the source of all that gold.
Right? He sends his spies, the ichthyophagy, with all these lavish gifts, purple robes, gold perfumes, basically the standard imperial welcome package that says you should join our system.
And the Macrobian king's response is just pure bravado. The sources say he was elected for his sheer size and strength. And he doesn't just reject the gifts, he sees them for what they are. Symbols of a soft life, tokens of enslavement to the Persian way.
And then he sends back the ultimate symbol of defiance, a single unstrung bow.
An unstrung bow of immense stiffness. And the message that comes with it is basically the founding mission statement of this new empire. He challenges the Persians and come back when one of you can string this bow.
But it's the second part of the message. That's the real foreign policy doctrine.
That's the kicker. Meanwhile, thank your gods that the sons of the Ethiopians do not covet lands that do not belong to them. It's a clear declaration. We want armed neutrality, but we have the specialized force to back it up.
In our timeline, Cambyses' invasion is a total disaster. His army just gets lost in the desert, a logistical nightmare. But in the ATL, alternate timeline, they don't see it as a lucky break.
No, in the ATL, it's reinterpreted. It becomes a decisive defensive victory, proof that their gods and their strategy worked. The repulsion of the world's greatest superpower is the catalyst.
It legitimizes the monarchy.
Instantly, the monarchy centralizes power, pulling together all those loose tribal groups from the interior and the merchant cities on the coast. The mission is suddenly crystal clear: deter northern aggression forever.
And that unstrung bow becomes the state symbol. It's not just about defense. It's about aggressively securing their trade routes, their lifeblood.
and this immediately forces a massive shift in how they govern. Remember in the OTL, original timeline, the Periplus says the Somali ports were ruled by these rival tyrannical chiefs.
Right? Which allowed foreign powers to just play them off one another, get a better price here, a better deal there.
It was Rome's #1 geopolitical weapon in the region. They loved having 10 little kings manipulate.
But the Oponian hegemony gets rid of that vulnerability completely.
Those local chiefs are no longer independent. They are now port governors, or naibs, appointed by the High King, the Bokor, who rules from a central capital, maybe Opone, maybe Amud.
And that's crucial because it means a unified foreign policy. Instead of 10 different prices, Rome now faces one king setting one price.
It turns Rome's dependency into Oponian's weapon.
This centralization then allows for 3 huge upgrades to the state. Let's start with the military.
The military goes from these ad hoc clan militias, which are fine for local skirmishes but useless for state warfare, to a professional standing army. We're calling them the cuirassiers. And critically, for a thalassocracy, a state navy, a real blue water navy using the Beden.
Okay, second, fiscal policy. They stop undercutting each other immediately.
They establish a state monopoly on the 2 most important luxury goods in the world, cinnamon and frankincense. They impose standardized high tariffs across all their ports. Revenue gets centralized and they start hoarding Roman gold. Trade is no longer just business, it's a weapon of the state.
And third, infrastructure. The archaeological evidence from places like Amud and Abasa, it shows they had the know-how for large stone-built cities.
Right? A level of building that in our timeline doesn't really show up for another 1,000 years until the Adal Sultanate.
So the wealth and security from this new unified state basically pulls that urbanization forward by a millennium. But how do you feed all these new cities and a professional army?
That's where the state makes its smartest investment. Hydraulic engineering. The Oponean state builds large-scale canals and irrigation systems using the water from the Shabelle and Jubba rivers. These are the kinds of projects that are later attributed to the Ajuran Sultanate.
And this is so important because it solves the biggest vulnerability for any power in the Horn of Africa.
Food security. Exactly.
So this intensive agriculture creates what you're calling a dual economy, which sounds incredibly stable.
It's the foundation of their resilience. You have the coast, the Guban, which is all about high-profit maritime trade and luxury goods from ports like Opone and Mosylon.
And then you have the interior.
The interior, the Ogo Highlands and the river valleys, provides the grain and livestock to feed the cities and the army. They're no longer dependent on food imports from Ethiopia, which gives them huge leverage when they eventually face off against Aksum.
So it's born from this single act of defiance, but it quickly becomes this incredibly self-sufficient imperial machine.
This brings up a really important question. Okay, so they have control, but how do they take what was basically a trade secret and turn it into a financial weapon powerful enough to bring a superpower like Rome to its knees?
And that secret is cinnamon. It's one of the most brilliant, long-running cons in economic history. For centuries, you have classical authors, Pliny, Herodotus, writing about cinnamon, and they are completely convinced it comes from the Horn of Africa.
They had these wild stories about giant cinnamon birds making nests out of it, but the real source, we now know, was Southeast Asia, China, Indonesia, Sri Lanka.
The fact that the entire Mediterranean world had no idea where it actually came from, that was the result of a massive intelligence operation.
It was a collusive agreement between Arab and Somali merchants to hide the source, protect their middleman status, and keep prices ridiculously high.
And the Oponian hegemony takes this informal agreement and makes it state policy, a grand strategy. They call it the monopoly of the monsoon.
And the mechanism is just brutal. First, you have the blockade. Any Indian or Austronesian ship coming in on the monsoon winds has to dock at one place and one place only, the imperial port of Opone,
which is the Ras Hafun Peninsula, a perfect natural fortress.
Exactly. And they are absolutely forbidden from going any further. They cannot enter the Red Sea. They cannot trade directly with Romans. The journey stops.
So what did that feel like for a Roman trader on the ground? It must have been an absolute wall.
An impenetrable wall? You arrive at Opone and you don't even talk to the Indian captain who brought the cinnamon. You talk to the port governor, the naib, and then comes the second step, the trans-shipment.
All the goods are offloaded.
Offloaded, taxed heavily, and then transferred exclusively onto Somali Beden vessels for the next leg of the journey to the Red Sea. The original ship's captain has to turn around and go home.
That's the genius of it. The Opone state captures 100% of the value, added tax, all the transport fees, and they control the flow of information. There are no leaks, no smuggling.
They're not just taxing a sale. They are nationalizing the entire supply chain that feeds Rome's addiction to luxury.
And the third piece is price setting. In our timeline, the ports were always undercutting each other to get that Roman gold.
The hegemony puts a stop to that. They set a single, unified, non-negotiable floor price for cinnamon and frankincense. If Rome says no, the shipments just stop.
And the leverage is immense. Because you're hitting Rome in two places, it really hurts religion and status.
The temples can't perform their rituals without frankincense. And the aristocracy, especially the wealthy women driving fashion, are cut off from their spices and perfumes. It's a calculated, patient squeeze.
To manage all this, they need infrastructure, which brings us to Mosylon, now Bosaso. The Periplis says it had a bad anchorage, but also vast quantities of cassia.
That little contradiction is the clue. In the ATL, Mosylon is transformed. It becomes the empire's industrial heartland. The state builds massive processing yards there. They take the raw cassia bark from India, they clean it, they grade it by quality, and they repack it into standardized palm fiber sacks.
So that vertical integration does two things. It adds value, obviously, but it also adds another layer of deception.
Precisely. If the goods are only ever seen, processed and packaged in Mosylon, it reinforces the lie that they come from there. It perpetuates the monopoly.
And they do the same thing with their own local resources, like tortoise shell.
The sources all agree the best tortoise shell in the world came from this coast. But instead of just selling the raw shells for cheap, the state organizes divers and artisans into guilds.
So they're creating a finished luxury goods industry.
Yes, they're exporting finished products, beautifully carved combs, inlays for furniture, and lyres. They're selling luxury, not commodities. It maximizes the amount of gold they can pull out of the Roman economy.
But to protect this whole financial machine, they need physical security, especially for their most valuable local resource, that high-grade frankincense from the very tip of the horn.
The Regio Aromatica, to protect it from raiders, or more importantly, from an Aksumite invasion from the highlands. The hegemony builds the incense wall.
And this isn't pure fantasy. It's based on real archaeological sites, like the Wargade Wall in Hir Shabelle and some big earthworks near Bosaso.
We're talking about a massive fortification stretching along the foothills of al-Miskad Mountains. It was incredibly expensive, but it was essential. It served two functions.
First, a physical barrier.
It physically blocks Aksumite armies from coming down and seizing the incense groves. A simple, effective defense.
And the second function is fiscal, a customs barrier.
Correct. Every single bit of wild harvested frankincense has to be brought through a controlled gate in that wall where it's weighed and taxed before it can even get to the coast. That wall is the physical guarantee of their state monopoly on land and at sea.
Okay, we've got the economic engine, but any sea power, any thalassocracy, needs a killer naval advantage. And this is where it gets really interesting, because their secret weapon wasn't gold. It was a flexible ship held together with coconut fiber.
The Beden, the ancient Somali stone. This is the backbone of the whole enterprise. It gives them a technological and an operational edge that lets them dominate the Indian Ocean in a way that, frankly, no one else could.
So, walk us through that again. Why was sewing planks together better in this environment?
Well, you have to think about what the Romans were using. Their galleys, their birames and triremes were built with rigid mortise and tenon joints. Very strong, very fast in the calm Mediterranean.
But the Indian Ocean is not the Mediterranean.
Not even close. In those massive deep ocean swells from the monsoons, that Roman rigidity is a fatal flaw. The hulls would come under incredible stress and just break apart.
It's like comparing a pane of glass to a flexible reed.
That is a perfect analogy. The Beden was engineered for flexibility. The planks were literally sewn together with core that's braided coconut fiber. This meant the hull could twist and move with the waves. Instead of fighting them, it could ride out storms that would have destroyed a Roman fleet.
And the Oponian state sees this advantage and decides to nationalize it.
Absolutely. They take over the big shipyards at Bela and Hafun, they create the Grand Fleet, and they develop a true blue water naval doctrine.
meaning they can project power far from the coast.
Far from the coast, they use their superior knowledge of celestial navigation and the monsoon cycles, knowledge they guarded jealously, to intercept their enemies out in the open ocean where Roman galleys were helpless. They controlled the terms of every naval engagement.
And their geography is just perfect for this. The Horn of Africa is a natural choke point on world trade, connecting the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean.
And they control two critical points on that route. First, the Bab al-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears. By fortifying the port of Avalite's modern Zayla on the African side, their navy can control everything going into or out of the Red Sea. They're basically charging a toll on the world's busiest highway.
And the second choke point is Cape Guardafui.
The Cape of Spices. You cannot sail south to Azania or east to India without rounding that cape. It's unavoidable. And our sources suggest they built a massive naval fortress at Damo, right near the cape. We even have archaeological evidence there. Rock-cut walls, Roman pottery that backs this up.
So that fortress at Damo is like a permanent sentinel. It's an intelligence hub.
It is. It's watching every ship that passes using signal towers and beacon fires. You can't sneak past the Oponian Navy. If you try to violate their monopoly, the Grand Fleet knows about it instantly and can intercept you hundreds of miles from shore.
So if we do a side-by-side comparison, say around 300 CE, the Oponian Navy just sounds like it's in a different league.
You know, it's night and day. The Roman Red Sea Fleet was basically a coastal patrol force. Their ships couldn't handle the open ocean. Aksum was even weaker, mostly using barges to ferry troops across the strait. They had no real deep-water capability.
But the Oponian hegemony has the war Beden. They can do high seas interception, blockade enforcement, and even rapid troop deployments to places like Yemen. Their operational range is the entire northwestern Indian Ocean. They are a true maritime superpower.
And what's so fascinating is how they turn that power, that economic and naval dominance, into a tool for continuous preemptive war against their main rival, Aksum.
The conflict was bound to happen. Aksum is this rising power stuck in the highlands, and their entire foreign policy is about one thing: breaking out to the coast to get control of those trade routes.
In our timeline, they succeed. They expand into Yemen and Kush, but in the ATL alternative timeline, their path is blocked at every turn by what we're calling the Opone Azure Wall, a wall of ships and money.
And they fight Aksum on two fronts at once, on land and at sea.
Exactly. Let's start with the inland frontier. Aksum keeps trying to push down from the highlands to grab those incense groves, trying to outflank the coastal monopoly.
But they're checked by the Oponian army.
They are. The Oponian have fortified their interior cities, Amud and Abasa, and turned them into forward bases. And critically, the terrain of the Ogaden Plains favors the Oponian mobile cavalry and archers over Aksum's heavy infantry, who are trained for mountain warfare. They can't sustain an occupation.
But the real action, the decisive front, has to be at sea, at Aksum's main port of Adulis.
Absolutely. The Oponian Navy imposes what we call the Adulis Blockade. Now, this isn't a 247 physical blockade. That would be too expensive. It's more of a financial strangulation.
Why does that work?
They use their control of the Bab al-Mandeb to demand cripplingly high tolls on any Aksumite ship that wants to pass. It's basically protection money.
And the goal is to bleed them dry financially.
Precisely. It stops Aksum from accumulating the kind of wealth they need to fund their big imperial projects, the giant stele, their expansionist wars. They can't hire mercenaries. They can't buy the loyalty of their nobles. Aksum stays rich, but it's trapped in the highlands, unable to project power overseas.
And this all comes to a head in 525 CE with the fight for control of South Arabia, the Jewish kingdom of Himyar.
In our timeline, this is a huge win for the West. Christian Aksum, with the full backing of Justinian's Rome, invades and conquers Himyar, securing the Red Sea for the Byzantines.
But in retail, the Oponian hegemony sees an Aksum-controlled Yemen as an existential threat. It would encircle them and break their monopoly. They cannot let it happen.
So they throw their full naval and financial power behind Himyar. They form what we call the Alliance of the Crescent. It's a tripartite pact designed specifically to stop this Aksumite Roman expansion.
And it's a very pragmatic alliance of strange bedfellows, isn't it? You've got the Jewish Himyarites, the Wakist Oponians, and the Zoroastrian Sassanid Persians.
It's the ultimate example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Shared geopolitical interests trumping any religious differences. Opone provides the navy and the archers. Persia, seeing a golden opportunity to disrupt Roman trade, provides the money. And crucially, the military engineers with new technology.
And Himyar provides the ground troops.
Right. So this all culminates in the Battle of the Red Sea. In 525 CE, the Aksumite king Caleb crosses the strait with a massive fleet, 70 ships.
And they sail right into a trap.
The Oponean Grand Fleet intercepts them. And this is where the Beden's superior maneuverability and the new Persian technology pay off.
Let's talk about that technology you mentioned, incendiary weapons like primitive Greek fire.
Essentially, yes. The Persians bring the knowledge of refined naphtha. They have these sealed clay pots filled with this sticky, highly flammable petroleum mixture. They're launched from catapults on the decks of the war Beden.
And they shatter on the wooden hulls of the Aksumite ships,
creating an instant, unstoppable firestorm. One hit can take a ship out of the fight. It turns the entire Aksumite invasion fleet into a floating inferno. Caleb's invasion is a total failure. Himyar survives as an independent Jewish state.
and the Red Sea becomes for all intents and purposes a hostile lake for the Roman Empire.
Justinian is forced to the negotiating table. He has to sue for peace. He has to recognize the Oponean monopoly or risk complete economic strangulation.
So, this victory cements their place in the world. Sans in Persia is now a formal military ally.
A partnership built on a shared enemy and mutual economic interest, which, by the way, is hinted at in our timeline by assassin pottery found at Hafun.
And their relationship with Rome becomes one of hostile codependence.
A perfect term for it. Rome absolutely despises them, these monopolists who are bleeding them dry, but they cannot survive without the luxury goods they control. The result is a massive, continuous drain of Roman gold, the solidus, into the Oponian treasury, which only makes the late Roman economic crisis that much worse.
It's a geopolitical wealth transfer on a scale we can barely imagine.
Okay, so let's try to visualize this empire. This was a real state with cities, infrastructure, and a fearsome military. And all of it is based on archaeological potential that was never fully realized in our world.
Let's start with the capital, Opone or Ras Hafun. In our timeline, excavations found tons of pottery from all over Egypt, Rome, Persia, a huge trade hub.
In the ATL, alternative timeline, it's not just a trade hub, it's a permanent walled capital city. The harbor is dredged, reinforced with stone quays for year-round naval operations. And the city itself has these multi-story limestone palaces in that beautiful Himyar Wayne style, but 1,000 years earlier.
And it's the financial center.
It has the imperial mint, which strikes its own gold coins that are so pure they actually rival the Roman solidus. The Oponian currency becomes the standard for the entire Indian Ocean.
Okay, next, Salwain or Mundus in OTL. This place is famous for its huge fields of cairns and standing stones.
In the hegemony, Salwain becomes the spiritual center. It's the necropolis for the Macrobian dynasty. Those standing stones are part of huge temple complexes dedicated to Wak, the sky god. But it also serves a clever secondary purpose.
Where they put the foreigners.
Exactly. The diplomatic quarter is here, deliberately keeping foreign envoys and spies away from the strategic military port at Opone. It's a way of maintaining operational security.
And finally, the inland fortresses, Amud and Abasa. The ruins show they could build sophisticated stone cities.
In the ATL, these are the logistical hubs for the Incense wall. They garrison the mobile cavalry armies, the cuirassiers. And they're critical because they also serve as a cool high-altitude retreat for the elite during the brutal summer heat on the coast, which means the government can run year-round.
Let's talk about that military. It all starts with the archers, right? That's core to the Macrobian identity Herodotus described.
It is. And we're not talking about simple hunting bows. These are specialized longbows with an incredible draw weight, just like the legendary unstrung bow. They have enough power to punch through Roman segmented armor at a reasonable distance.
Let me use poisoned arrows.
A long-standing Somali tradition using snake venom or plant toxins. This isn't just about killing people. It's psychological warfare. An enemy soldier gets a minor wound, but he knows he's facing a slow, agonizing death. It can paralyze an entire army with fear.
In backing up the archers, you have the heavy infantry, the cuirasses.
We actually have Chinese sources much later that talk about the Somali coast having 20,000 armored troops, so the capacity was there. In Opone, these are the Immortals, a professional stand-in army. They're equipped with imported Persian steel or locally forged iron. 20,000 professionals is a massive army for any ancient empire.
And finally, their naval tactics. They combine their superior ship design with foreign tech.
Right. The Beden itself has these tall prows and sterns, which gives their marines a height advantage. They can just fire down onto the decks of lower Roman galleys.
But the real game changer was the Persian alliance.
Absolutely. Those naphtha pots, the primitive Greek fire in the confined waters of the Red Sea, that technology is dead devastating against wooden fleets. It ensures their naval supremacy right where it counts the most. And if we connect all this to the bigger picture, having a powerful, centralized, self-confident empire means they can resist the kind of cultural pressures that changed everything in our timeline.
You mean religion? In our timeline, the conversion to Islam in the 7th century happened in part because there was a power vacuum.
A powerful empire doesn't have a vacuum. It's much more likely to codify and centralize its own traditions. So, the indigenous monotheism of Ibe or Wak becomes the official state religion. The emperor, the Bokor, becomes the vicegerent of Wak. His authority is homegrown, not imported.
And their critical alliance with the Jewish kingdom of Himyar creates a very unique religious environment.
It does. The empire becomes a safe haven for non-Christian monotheists in the region. And over time, you can see a syncretic faith emerging, a sort of Abrahamic Cushitic blend that mixes Waksism with aspects of Mosaic law. It creates a religious bloc that is highly resistant to both Byzantine Christianity and later the Arab Caliphate.
It's a spiritual buffer state. And we have to talk about the matriarchal legacy. The stories of Queen Arawilo are so strong in Somali folklore.
In the ATL, Arawilo isn't a myth, she's history. The Opone dynasty likely allows for queens regnant or co-rule, and this gives them a stability advantage over the strictly patriarchal courts in Persia and Rome, which were constantly plagued by succession crises.
And you can see women taking on key administrative roles, maybe running the complex internal economy, the food supply chain, while the men focus on the military and naval side of things.
It's an efficient division of imperial labor.
Okay, but what about the great disasters of late antiquity? The plague of Justinian in 541 CE, it devastated Rome, and Aksum surely would have hit a trade hub like Opone.
Oh, it definitely hits them. The coastal cities would have suffered terribly, but their social structure gives them a unique resilience.
Because so much of the population is pastoralist and spread out across the interior.
Exactly. The disease would struggle to move through those dispersed mobile communities. So the core of their military and agricultural manpower, the people in the hinterland, remains largely intact. The state survives the demographic shock much better than its more urbanized rivals.
And then the ultimate test, the rise of Islam. In the 630s, in OTL, Islam spread into the political vacuum left by a weakened Aksum in Persia.
But there is no vacuum here. The Opponean Empire, with its allies, is a formidable military and financial obstacle. They are an empire of equal standing to the early caliphate.
So outright conquest is just too costly.
Too risky, especially when the caliphate is fighting on multiple other fronts. So what's more likely is that they negotiate. The caliphate signs a formal treaty with the Emperor of the Blacks, recognizing their power.
So they do eventually convert to Islam, but on their own terms.
On their own terms, retaining their political independence and their cultural identity, much like Persia did. The Horn of Africa remains a sovereign imperial power well into the Middle Ages.
This has been a true deep dive. The core argument here is just devastatingly simple. The historical fragmentation of the ancient Somali coast was a geopolitical catastrophe for the region. It left a vacuum that allowed Aksum and Rome to completely dominate.
The Oponian hegemony, fueled by that cinnamon monopoly. Industrializing its own resources and wielding the power of the Beden would have been a genuine third pillar of the ancient world. It would have strangled Aksum in its cradle and preserved its allies, completely redrawing the map.
The ruins we see today at Salwain Damo and Amud, they're not just relics of old trading posts. In this alternate reality, They are the foundations of an Atlantis that almost was a tight-knit of the Indian Ocean that never fell.
So, we'll leave you with this to think about. If the Opponean hegemony had survived as a sovereign power into the Middle Ages, continuing that massive economic drain on the West and providing organized resistance to external powers, how does that change the world?
It seems likely that the center of global power would have shifted away from the Mediterranean much, much earlier. And maybe most provocatively, the very existence of a powerful, ancient, non-fragmented imperial state in the Horn might have made the European scramble for Africa centuries later simply impossible in that region.